All right, so we're diving into a classic today. Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus by John Gray.
Oh, a classic for sure. I mean, it's become a bit of a cultural phenomenon, wouldn't you say?
It really has. And, it's interesting how this book, with its pretty simple premise that men and women are from different planets, really resonated with so many people.
Yeah, that's the core of it, right? That men and women just fundamentally think and feel and communicate differently.
And that leads to all sorts of misunderstandings and conflict in relationships.
Absolutely.
And that's what we're going to be unpacking in this deep dive. What are those key differences Gray talks about, and how can understanding them help us all navigate relationships better?
Exactly, because the book argues that these differences, when they're not understood, are really the root cause of most of the issues between men and women.
One of the first things that jumped out at me was this whole Mr. Fix-It versus the Home Improvement Committee thing.
Right.
Gray argues that men, they're from Mars, they're all about action and efficiency.
It's like it's in their DNA to solve problems and maintain control.
Right. So when a woman comes home from work, she's had a stressful day, she wants to talk about it, and the guy immediately goes into solution mode.
It makes sense on Mars, but on Venus, not so much.
Totally. Because on Venus, what women often want is just to be heard and understood, not necessarily to be given a to-do list of how to fix everything.
Right, exactly. Gray uses that great example of Tom and Mary, remember? Mary's exhausted. She starts telling Tom about her boss. And Tom, instead of listening, just jumps right in with solutions like, why don't you ask for a raise? Or maybe you should just quit.
And Mary ends up feeling even worse because Tom's not really getting it. It's like he's missing the point completely.
Yeah, he's speaking Martian, she's speaking Venusian, total communication breakdown.
Totally. And Gray even provides this sort of translation guide, right?
Yeah.
He lists these common phrases that men use, often unintentionally, that just completely invalidate a woman's feeling.
Things like, you're overreacting, or just let it go.
Oh, those are classics. And I think we've all been on the receiving end of those at some point, and it's just like, oof. Not helpful.
Not at all. The point here is that men see problems as things to be solved, whereas women, they see problems more as opportunities to connect and process their emotions.
And recognizing that is key to more effective communication.
Absolutely.
Now, this leads us to another classic Martian-Venusian difference: the cave and the need to talk.
Right. Men in their caves.
Gray uses this cave metaphor to describe how men deal with stress. They withdraw, they go silent.
Retreat, recharge, process things internally.
Exactly. And for women who often deal with stress by talking things out, this can be incredibly confusing.
Because it feels like rejection, even when that's not at all what the man intends.
Right. Gray talks about this example of Jim comes home from work, immediately buries himself in the newspaper, and his wife, Mary, just assumes he doesn't want to talk to her, and they end up arguing.
Classic misunderstanding. This Martian need for space, it's not personal, it's just a different way of coping.
And for women, the challenge is to recognize this and not take it personally, to give him the space he needs to come out of his cave on his own terms.
Exactly. No dragging him out, no forcing him to talk before he's ready.
And on the flip side, men need to understand that for women, talking things out can be a way to find relief and connect.
Different planets, different languages.
That's like speaking different languages, Yeah. And without a good translator, things can get lost in translation really quickly.
That's a great analogy. So, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about motivation, another area where men and women are often on different wavelengths.
Absolutely.
Gray says men are motivated by feeling needed, while women are motivated by feeling cherished.
This is where that knight in shining armor complex comes in, right?
Yeah, men, they want to be the hero, the provider, the problem solver.
And when they feel needed and appreciated for their efforts, it really fuels their motivation.
Exactly. For women, it's more about feeling cherished, emotionally supported, like their feelings and needs are a priority.
Right, like they're truly seen and valued.
Exactly. When that doesn't happen, it can lead to resentment, a feeling of disconnect.
Absolutely. Now, Gray tells this really powerful story of Susan and Jim, a couple on the verge of divorce. Jim was working incredibly hard, providing a comfortable lifestyle for his family.
But he wasn't giving Susan the emotional attention she craved, those little gestures of love and appreciation.
So even though Jim thought he was doing everything right, Susan was feeling neglected and unloved, and they were both miserable.
Classic example of giving in the wrong language. Jim was speaking, Martian actions speak louder than words. Susan was speaking Venusian. I need to feel cherished and emotionally connected.
It's not enough to just love someone. You have to love them the way they need to be loved, and that's a key takeaway here.
Couldn't agree more. Understanding these differences can unlock a deeper level of connection.
Now, speaking of speaking different languages, one of my favorite parts of the book is Gray's Venusian Martian phrase dictionary.
Oh, that's a classic.
It's like a cheat sheet for decoding those cryptic messages from the opposite sex.
Right, like when a woman says, "We never do anything fun anymore," what she really means is, "I want to spend some quality time with you, doing something we both enjoy."
Or when a man says, I'm fine, what he might actually be feeling is, I'm overwhelmed and need some space.
Classic misinterpretations because we're not speaking the same language.
Right, we need to become fluent in both Martian and Venusian to really avoid those breakdowns.
Exactly. And Gray gives us the tools to do just that.
Now, another interesting point Gray makes is that men and women even process information differently. Men tend to think things through silently before responding.
Internal processors.
Right, whereas women often think out loud. They process their emotions through verbalizing.
Makes sense.
So when a woman's talking through a problem, she's not necessarily looking for solutions. She's just processing her feelings.
But men, with their Martian problem-solving brains, jump in with solutions before she's even finished talking.
And that can make her feel like he's not listening, that he
Yeah.
doesn't understand her. And it just leads to those frustrating conversations where both people end up feeling unheard.
Absolutely. So guys, sometimes the best way to support a woman is to just listen, no solutions needed, just validate her feelings and let her know you hear her.
And for women, it's helpful to recognize that men often need time to process before they can articulate their thoughts.
It's not indifference, just a different style.
It's not that they don't care, it's just a different way of thinking.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of Gray's most well-known analogies, the rubber band. He uses this to explain the male intimacy cycle.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting.
The idea is that men periodically need to pull away to regain their sense of autonomy before they can get closer again.
Now, for women, this pulling away can feel like rejection, especially if they're not aware of this cycle.
It can be confusing, hurtful, even lead to doubts about the relationship.
Right. But Gray stresses that it's not personal, it's just how men recharge and reconnect with their independence.
It's about understanding that natural ebb and flow.
And the more a man can embrace this cycle without guilt, and the more a woman can understand it without taking it personally, the stronger their connection can be.
Absolutely. He talks about Lisa and Jim, remember? They were struggling because Jim wasn't pulling away enough.
Too much togetherness.
It sounds counterintuitive, but in their case, it was creating tension. Jim felt smothered, Lisa felt insecure and needy.
But when they understood the rubber band analogy and Jim started allowing himself to pull away, something amazing happened.
Lisa became more independent, and their connection actually became stronger when Jim sprang back.
It's like giving each other space to breathe allows the relationship to flourish.
It really does, and that's a powerful insight for both men and women.
No, just as men are like rubber bands, Gray says women are like waves.
Oh yes, the waves.
This captures how a woman's self-esteem and emotional well-being go up and down.
Ebb and flow, like the tide.
Right. There are highs and lows, and sometimes those lows can be pretty intense.
And when a woman's wave crashes, it's a time for emotional processing, for feeling those feelings fully, and for seeking support.
But men, with their Martian fix-it mentality, often misinterpret this. They think they've done something wrong.
Their instinct is to fix it, make the negative feelings go away.
But what a woman really needs during those times is to just be heard and understood.
Not fixed, just heard.
She doesn't need him to fix her. She needs him to just be present and listen with empathy.
And one of the most powerful ways men can do that is through
Scoring points. I love this concept. Gray introduces this point system to show how men and women kind of keep score in relationships based on how their needs are being met.
And here's the thing, for women, little things matter just as much as big things when it comes to scoring points.
Which often throws men off because they tend to think in terms of grand gestures.
Exactly. A man might think he's winning by working hard, providing financially, but if he's neglecting those small everyday gestures of love, he's losing points.
Like bringing her flowers, complimenting her, helping out around the house.
Precisely. And Gray gives this whole list of little things men can do to score points.
I love that list. It's like a cheat sheet for Martian men.
Right. Some of my favorites are offering a massage, being on time, giving her your undivided attention.
These are all expressions of thoughtfulness and care that go a long way in making a woman feel loved and valued.
It's about speaking her love language. When a man makes that effort, the relationship thrives.
Now, before we wrap up this first part, let's go back to the core message of men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Okay.
Understanding and fulfilling each other's emotional needs. That's the key to creating lasting love and happiness.
It's the foundation of a successful relationship.
Gray lays it out so clearly. Men need to feel trusted, accepted, appreciated, admired, approved of, and encouraged.
And women need to feel cared for, understood, respected, devoted to, validated, and reassured.
And when we can meet those needs consistently.
Love flourishes. It's like we're giving each other the emotional nourishment we need.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part, but there's still more to explore. We'll be back to dive deeper into some of the more nuanced aspects of Gray's work after a quick break.
Welcome back. It's great to be back delving deeper into Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by John Gray.
We've been talking about all these interesting differences between men and women, but, what happens when those differences lead to conflict? How do we deal with that without, sinking the ship?
That's the key, right? How do we navigate those rough waters? Well, thankfully, John Gray gives us some pretty practical tools for communicating those difficult feelings in a way that brings people closer instead of pushing them apart.
And one of the techniques he talks about, which I found really interesting, is the love letter technique.
Oh, that's a good one.
So can you tell me a little more about that? How does that work?
Basically, the idea is instead of trying to hash things out in the heat of the moment when you're both feeling emotional and defensive, you take a little time to write a letter to your partner,
Okay.
expressing your feelings about the issue.
So it's like taking a pause, stepping back from that emotional ping pong match, and giving yourself some space to really think through what you want to say.
Exactly. And the key here is to focus on expressing your own feelings and needs, not blaming or criticizing your partner.
So more I statements, less you statements.
Exactly. So instead of saying, "You never listen to me," you would write something like, "I feel hurt and unimportant when I don't feel heard."
It's a subtle shift, but I can see how it would make a big difference in how the message is received.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because when we feel attacked, we get defensive, and that just escalates the conflict.
But when we feel understood, even if we don't agree, it opens the door for empathy and connection.
Right, and that's where the really cool part of the love letter technique comes in. So after you've written your letter, you exchange letters with your partner.
So I write a letter to you, you write a letter to me, both about the same issue.
Yes, but there's one more step. After you exchange those letters, you each write a response letter, but this time you write it from the other person's perspective.
Oh, wow. So I would write a letter back to you, as if I were you, acknowledging your feelings and trying to see things from your side.
Exactly. It's a powerful exercise in empathy because it forces you to step outside of your own limited perspective and really get into your partner's head.
That sounds incredibly challenging, but also really, really beneficial.
It is. It's like building a bridge of understanding between those two different planets.
Between Mars and Venus.
Exactly. It's about creating that safe space for honest communication where both people feel heard and validated.
And Gray argues that writing these letters has some real advantages over trying to have those conversations face to face.
Absolutely. I mean, writing just allows us to slow down, choose our words more carefully, express ourselves more fully without getting interrupted or defensive.
And you have that time to really process your own emotions, to understand yourself and your partner better.
It's like a form of self-discovery as well.
I can see how this would be super helpful for couples who tend to get stuck in those same argument loops over and over again.
Oh, absolutely. It breaks those patterns and creates a whole new way of communicating. Now, Gray does acknowledge that this whole love letter thing might feel awkward at first, especially for people who are more direct communicators.
I can see that. It might feel a little forced or unnatural at the beginning.
Right. But he encourages couples to give it a try, stressing that it's not about being right or winning the argument.
It's about understanding.
It's about creating a space for understanding and resolution.
And recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back from the conflict. Give yourself and your partner space to breathe.
Now, another really insightful concept Gray talks about is how our past experiences, especially those unresolved childhood wounds, can really impact our present relationships.
This is where it gets deep, right? Those deep-seated fears and insecurities that we might not even be aware of.
Exactly. And those unresolved issues can trigger such intense reactions in our adult relationships that seem totally out of proportion to the current situation.
Like feeling completely abandoned by your partner, even though they haven't actually done anything to warrant that feeling.
Exactly. It's like we're projecting those old hurts onto the present, creating a distorted view of what's actually happening.
And what's interesting is that Gray says these projections can even happen during good times.
That's right. That's why couples sometimes fight when they should be celebrating.
So strange, but I guess it makes sense.
He calls it the delayed reaction response. Sometimes those unresolved feelings from the past surface after we've gotten what we wanted or achieved a long sought goal.
It's like we finally feel safe enough to let those old hurts come up.
Exactly. So we might achieve something we've been working towards, and instead of feeling happy, we feel sad or resentful.
Because those repressed emotions need to be acknowledged and processed in order to be released.
It's about understanding that these seemingly irrational reactions often have deep roots.
And having compassion for ourselves and our partners when those reactions occur.
Instead of blaming each other, we can recognize that those intense feelings are often coming from a place of old pain that needs to be healed.
It's about seeing each other with empathy and understanding.
Knowing that we all have those invisible wounds that can get triggered unexpectedly.
And the more we can address those wounds, the more fulfilling our relationships can be.
Absolutely. And one of the most common ways those unresolved feelings show up is through arguments.
And Gray has some really interesting things to say about why men and women argue and how to avoid those destructive patterns.
He says most arguments come down to not feeling loved or appreciated.
It goes back to those different languages we were talking about.
When those needs aren't met, we get defensive, critical, even hostile.
And Gray points out that men often feel attacked when a woman expresses her upset feelings.
Because they interpret it as blame or disapproval, which triggers those deep-seated fears of not being good enough.
It's like they're back on Mars, having to prove themselves to the tribe.
Their instinct is to either defend themselves or withdraw emotionally.
Which, of course, just makes the woman feel even more unheard and unloved.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
But Gray suggests that men can break this cycle by understanding that a woman's emotional expression isn't personal.
It's just her way of processing her feelings and seeking connection.
It's about creating a safe space for her to express herself without feeling judged or dismissed.
And when a man can do that, it builds a powerful sense of trust and intimacy.
Now, on the other hand, Gray points out that women can unintentionally hurt men in arguments by being disapproving or critical.
Because when a woman challenges a man's behavior or expresses her disappointment, it can trigger those deep-seated fears of not being good enough.
It's like she's chipping away at his sense of worthiness.
Right, and his instinct is to withdraw or become defensive and argumentative.
So Gray suggests that women can avoid triggering these negative reactions by focusing on expressing their feelings and needs without blaming or criticizing their partner.
So instead of saying, you always do X, and it's so inconsiderate, she could say, I feel hurt when you do X.
It's about focusing on the impact of the behavior, not the behavior itself.
Exactly. By making that subtle shift in communication, women can express their needs without making their partner feel like he's under attack.
It's about creating a win-win situation where both partners feel heard and respected.
And that's really what Gray's trying to teach us, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Men are from Mars, women are from Venus is more than just a relationship guide. It's a blueprint for creating more loving connections in every area of our lives.
It's about understanding and embracing our differences, communicating with compassion and empathy.
And creating a space where love can really flourish.
So how do we take all these insights and apply them to our own relationships? We'll explore that and more in the final part of our deep dive into Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
It's been quite a journey exploring these fascinating differences between men and women.
And we've seen how those differences can create real challenges, but also real opportunities for growth and connection. Absolutely.
So what are some of the key takeaways? What really stood out to you?
Well, for me, one of the biggest things is just how important it is to really understand each other's emotional needs.
Right? Because when those needs are met, you build that foundation of trust and intimacy.
Exactly. It's like the bedrock of a healthy relationship.
But when those needs aren't met, that's when you start to see conflict and resentment creeping in.
And the thing is, those needs can look so different for men and women.
It's like they're coming from different planets, remember?
Exactly. Gray says men need to feel trusted, accepted, appreciated, admired, approved of, encouraged.
And women need to feel cared for, understood, respected, devoted to, validated, reassured.
It's not that one set of needs is more important than the other.
It's about recognizing that we both have valid needs and finding ways to meet them in a way that works for both partners.
Absolutely.
Another big takeaway for me was this idea of validating each other's feelings.
Oh, validation is huge.
Because when we feel validated, we feel seen, we feel heard, we feel understood.
And that creates a sense of safety and security in the relationship.
But when we feel invalidated, it's like our feelings are being dismissed. And that can be really hurtful.
So, men, remember, when a woman's expressing her feelings, she's not necessarily blaming you or asking you to fix something.
She just needs you to listen with empathy and acknowledge her experience.
And ladies, when a man retreats to his cave, try not to take it personally.
Give him the space he needs, and he'll come back recharged and ready to connect.
It's not a rejection, it's just his way.
And of course, we can't forget about the love letter technique.
Oh, such a powerful tool for communicating those tough feelings.
It really takes the heat out of the moment, allows you to express yourself more thoughtfully.
And that response letter exercise, writing from your partner's perspective, that's where the real magic happens.
It forces you to see the situation from a whole new angle.
And to understand your partner's experience on a deeper level.
So much wisdom packed into this book really gives you a whole new framework for understanding those age-old differences between men and women.
And that understanding is really the key to building stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely. That about wraps up our deep dive into Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus.
A classic for a reason, I'd say.
It really is. Lots to think about and apply to our own lives.
Until next time, keep exploring those Martian Venusian mysteries.